Special edition of Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Adam Caplan on a TGIF Friday. I'm Josh Ennick, filling in for Mike Gill here on 97.3 ESPN along with Hunter Birdie. Big Eagles news came down today. Vinny Curry re-signs with the Philadelphia Eagles. To get into all that and more today, the co-host of the Inside the Birds podcast, as promised, Adam Caplan, on a Friday instead of a Thursday. Adam, appreciate you jumping on a Friday this week.
Yeah, boys, good to talk to you. Yeah, Vinny Curry's back. It's a one-year deal. It won't be official, and it won't be official until he signs it, and then he's got to pass the physical. So he's agreed to the deal. And look, we've said on our show for weeks this has been in the works. I know talking to Jeff Mosher and his reporting. Jeff said it was either going to be the Browns or the Eagles. And when we look at the Curry situation, what we had said on our show turned out to be right. Going with Josh Sweat as their third end was dubious. It just was not going to work because the sense that I get with Josh Sweat is you can't ask him to play a ton of snaps. Because remember, when you're the third end, you're an injury away from playing as a starter, which means 40 to 50 snaps a game. So they couldn't do that, and Vinny's done it very well in the past. He had a terrific year, by the way, last year. He is in his 30s, and I know the Eagles like to get better, but you get younger. We've got some younger players. You could just assume Curry won't be back next year. This will certainly be it. But guys like Sharif Miller, Joe Osman probably are not going to get the field very much if they make the team.
Is it fair to expect that Vinny Curry will play the same way? Because as you said, I mean, he did have a tremendous season last year, but I would argue that maybe it was a bit of surprise that he played that well.
Yeah, Hunter, the only thing that he won't do, because now with Malik Jackson back, you're not going to move him inside, or you're not going to move Brandon Graham inside because they've got Javon Hargrave in there, and Malik Jackson is now healthy, and Hassan Ridgeway is also healthy. So they do not need to use ends at D-tackle anymore, bargain injury. So Curry will not get the same amount of snaps. He won't play as much, and that's why he was not going to get a huge one-year deal, plus he's in his 30s. But this gives them insurance in case Barnett or Graham suffer an injury. They've got an experienced guy who has started before. He knows this wide nine system. He's played in it quite a bit in his career. And it makes a lot of sense. And they kept in contact with Vinny and his two agents from Athletes First. And they got this deal done today. And that leaves one hole. That was clearly one of the top three challenges this offseason. We're really going into training camp as defensive end. They've now filled that. Certainly linebacker. And obviously now with Brandon Brooks out for at least for the regular season. By the way, he's not on injury reserve. He's on active PUP, but he won't play during the regular season at the very least. Was getting a veteran defensive line, offensive line. They got Jason Peters back, so I'd say right now it's really running back and linebacker are certainly two holes. One in back of Sanders, then other just getting some depth at linebacker.
Adam, I'm curious because one of the things Jeff also reported was that it was a competitive financial offer from the Browns for Curry. So can you give the audience a little bit of insight into, maybe why the Browns were so interested in Vinny and what it means that Vinny chose to stay with Philadelphia?
Yeah, so in my gathering information from Brown Source, they were looking for a third end. They've got Adrian Claiborne, who really can only play one side. He had a pre-existing injury when he was drafted in the first round by the Bucs, so he can only play one defensive end side. Vinny could play either, and also could play inside defensive tackle. The Browns loved Vinny's versatility. They would have, as I understand it, played him a little bit inside at defensive tackle in addition to probably being their third end. But don't forget, Vinny's from Neptune, New Jersey. The Eagles have had this long relationship with Vinny. They remember when he left to go to the Bucs, they never lost touch with him. They've always had this great working relationship with him, and he's been really a terrific Eagle. I remember I was actually working for the Eagles from a media standpoint for 3 years, 11, 12, and 13, before I went to ESPN. And I remember when Vinny was drafted, he was in awe because he grew up as an Eagles fan. He knew who Merrill Reese was, and some of the people who actually worked for the Eagles, he knew who they were. It's kind of amazing. And we're talking about this now 9 years later. He's playing in the twilight of his career for the team that he grew up watching.
Where do you rank this defensive line now that they added Vinny Curry? Does this type of move jump them past another team, or does it not make it that much better in terms of, when it comes to how good these top guys are going to be, that is what would make them jump over other squads.
Yeah, it's strong. The one thing that they don't have at DN, Hunter, is clearly a top-end pass rusher. They're tremendous at D-tackle. Probably the best D-tackle rotation in the league. And I could tell you that a guy they really like is Anthony Rush, who they signed off the Raiders practice squad last season. But the problem with Rush was his weight. I'm told he reported last season when they got him off the Oakland's practice squad. He was over 360 pounds, which is just too big. I know he's really tall. He's 6'5", very long arms. But I am told he showed up to training camp in great shape. Like when I say great shape, under 350, which is something for a guy like this who is 6'5", it's extremely long arms. He's a big guy. But the good thing is he did lose weight, and that's a very good sign as he pushes to be their fifth D tackle. They won't keep more than 5, and they may only keep 4, but this is a guy they're really excited about.
Adam Caplan joining us here, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Drops every Monday and Thursday morning for all of your inside information on the Philadelphia Eagles and the NFL. Adam Caplan joining us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Adam, one of the things I know you guys were talking about also on the podcast this week, with in light of Vinny Curry being added to the D-line, is what does this also mean for the overall defense and what maybe Jim Schwartz wants to do? Because we know that the things that you and Jeff have talked about on the pod is that, with Darius Slay, obviously Jim has the opportunity to do things a little bit differently in the secondary. So how does Vinny coming in impact maybe what Schwartz does with the front as well?
Yeah, Hunter, Josh, let's start up front, okay? This is a great thing to talk about, because the thing that Jeff and I have been saying, particularly myself, is I'd heard from some of my people with the Eagles that for the first time since Schwartz has gotten here from 16, they're so deep at certain positions. D-line, they're very, very deep. Safety, they're very, very deep. Corner, they're not deep, but they've now got a man-to-man corner in Slay. The feeling was, now this is before the pandemic, of course, they were going to be able to do some things that Schwartz had never been able to do before. Play a lot of man coverage, which is something that they really couldn't do enough of because they were just so bad at corner. Now they're good there. They've got younger at safety. Obviously, McLeod's there, but Jalen Mills is moving to safety. Will Parks is a young player who they really like, who hails from the Philly area. Kayvon Wallace, who they really, really like, who think will be a future starter. And then you've got this tremendous D-tackle rotation, and actually Schwartz talked about it. He didn't rule out certain formations when they'll go with 3D tackles, which should obviously be Hargrave, Cox, and Jackson. So, Josh, when you really look at it, and Jannard Avery, by the way, who they traded for as a fourth-round pick, the Eagles have never really been a defense that stood up defensive ends, because this is what you do in a 34, or you would stand up outside linebackers in a 34 like Avery when he was with Cleveland when they played a 34. They're going to be able to do some different things this year that we haven't seen. Now, the only thing is, guys, because there was no offseason on the field and there's no preseason, I don't know to be able to get to a lot of this because you just don't have enough time to teach this stuff. That is the only disappointment about this offseason, I would say, in terms of on the field. And this goes to offense too, guys, and this is one thing for your listeners to understand. There are a lot of plans that teams have for players going into an offseason, and then with an unprecedented situation like this, but just some things they're not going to be able to do, unfortunately.
What should we expect out of Rodney McLeod? Is there going to be a different role involved now that Malcolm Jenkins isn't there anymore?
I would say, Hunter, not specifically. Mills is the guy that they're going to move. He's going to play more in the box. Rodney's a deep safety. But I would say this: with Malcolm Jenkins gone, he's going to have to take on more of a leadership role. We're not talking about obviously playing, but he's got to help set guys up. He is the one guy. Remember, Slay's not new to the defense in a sense because he played for Schwartz 1 year in 2013 with the Lions, but he's new to it. Jalen Mills is changing a position, of course. Vontae Maddox may or not be starting. He's going to compete for that starting job opposite Slay. Nicole Roby-Coleman, who'll be their nickel corner, is new. So, yeah, he is the elder statesman. He is the one returning starter in the secondary, and this is going to be big for him. And by the way, he's signed for this season and next season. I mean, this is probably going to be it for Roddy this season and next season. I don't think they would bring him back for a third year. So this is really it here until he hands off to a guy like Kayvon Wallace.
Adam, we know that Jim Schwartz in many ways is the head coach of the defense. Well, the head coach of the team, Doug Pederson, He's not in the building right now. This has been a topic of a lot of people over the last week, a lot of questions. So what are some of the challenges of Doug not being in the building, and what does that entail for what this team is going to want to do as this very, very different type of camp is underway?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Josh, and let's hope Doug gets back, very, very soon, whenever he feels right, and obviously he passes at least 2 tests. But if this situation goes to, late August, because they cannot be in pads. I was just checking on it today to get the date right. It actually can't. I thought it was August 16th. It's actually August 17th. But, that's the hope, is that he'll be back by then, because that's really when the competition starts. They start game planning for week 1 the last week of August. Training camp is really only, the real part of training camp is only 2.5 weeks. So if you don't get Doug back, guys, by late August, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge here, because Rich Scangarello, who's sort of in a way, I know he's new, but he's a senior member in terms of what he's done in his career. Scangarello's role is going to take on a pretty big importance here, because he has been a coordinator. He was with the Broncos last season. He was a coordinator at Wagner University. He knows this West Coast offense. Not to the degree that Pederson would, of course, because Pederson runs his own version of Andy Reid's offense, but he knows the philosophy of it. And he is by the way, we talk about that. Jeff and I talk about that at length with Rich's role here, which we have heard it's going to be pretty extensive. He's not the coordinator. We know that they don't have one, and we know that Press Taylor has an increased role, but Press Taylor does not have the experience of Rich Scangarello. So that's a guy to keep an eye on as this thing, if Doug continues to miss time, unfortunately, but if he does, I think Scangarello's role is going to be a little bit bigger than we imagined.
Yeah, Jeff, let's also touch on the rest of the staff, because I know Zach Ertz was speaking to the media today. He said Jeff Stoutland is in charge of the running game. We know that Press Taylor's, one of his titles is passing game coordinator. Right. I know they brought in Marty Morningweg. So give the audience a little bit of an idea of what you expect each guy's role to be within that offensive coaching staff. Yeah,
I think, Josh, when you look at this situation, here's the deal. They're bringing Marty Morningweg, Coach Michael Vick, Steve Young. He was with Josh. He was with obviously with the Ravens for 1 year with Lamar Jackson. But he's been around mobile quarterbacks. And when you see Jalen Hurts, all these guys have coached mobile quarterbacks. That's really going to help. And by the way, wait till you hear Bill Polian, the Hall of Fame general manager. Wait till you hear what Bill had to say about Jalen Hurts. Completely not what I expected on our show. In a good way. It was very positive. But he took my question to him about Jalen Hurts in a completely opposite direction, because he knows, as well as we all do, Jalen Hurts will never just be a quarterback for the Eagles. As long as he's on that football team, he's going to be a guy that they're going to use in a variety of ways. And this is where, Josh, you bring up all these guys that they've added. They're all going to have a piece of how the vision for the way to use Jalen Hurts. And also, by the way, with Carson Wentz, different ways to move him, roll him out in the pocket. I'll tell you what, I know, as I said earlier, it's a short off season, and they're not going to get a lot of training camp. There's no preseason. But I'm just hoping, with all these smart guys there, that they do some special things on offense, because this offense has a chance to be really, really interesting.
What's the early word at training camp on the structure of practices this week for the veterans and rookies?
Yeah, okay, so I'm glad we were talking about this, because it's a little bit different than I was told. So the veterans are really not practicing. They're doing conditioning work, because they just got in this week. They actually got in on Monday. The rookies are a week ahead of them, so they're doing a little bit of on-field work, not structured, just throwing drills, nothing heavy. It's like phase 1. Next week is when they'll start. They're only doing walkthroughs, by the way, this week. That's the only organized stuff that they're doing on the field. The rookies are as walkthroughs. Next week, they'll move on to the next phase, where they'll have about 2 hours of practice, and about an hour and a half will be just very, very light, the thing about next week is, guys, you don't really want to judge these guys, because they haven't been together very long. But when you really look at the situation with training camps and so forth, not much is going on. But here's what I could tell you, which is important. Andre Dillard, I'm told, weighs 325 pounds. He's up. He's up about 15 pounds over last year. That is really big in terms of putting that mass on. That is important. But the teaching part of it, guys, we just don't know until they put the pads on the 17th, really what it's going to mean, this strength, because they got to teach him. Remember, they've got a new D-line coach, and the Eagles have also revamped their offense, as we were talking about. Not their line coach, of course, with Dillard, but they've revamped their coaching staff. So when we evaluate all these players, you can't make any hard judgment. You just can't. And when I mentioned the defensive line, Matt Burke now is a full-time coach. He's the D-line coach. He's never coached the offensive line before, though he's been D coordinator. So there's been a lot of moving parts on both sides of the football for these coaches, and we have to be patient here a little bit.
Speaking of patience, what kind of patience should we also expect for a guy like Jason Peters who's moving to a new position?
Yeah, and by the way, Bill Polian does talk about this a little bit on our show, and he thinks that it might be the first few weeks might be a little bit of a challenge. But I agree with what Peterson said and Todd Herman said on our show and others that he's going to get it. I wouldn't worry about. It's Andre Dillard, though he's put the weight on, as I'm told, but the technique and the footwork, that is what the OTAs are for in May and June, and he didn't get that on-field work. So I'm concerned a little bit about Dillard. We actually, 2 shows ago, Jeff and I kind of evaluated where Dillard's at, and my level of concern would be a 7 because he did not have an off-season. That's on a 10-point scale, by the way.
I asked Moshe this on Tuesday, and I want to get your thoughts as well. Should the Eagles quarantine Carson Wentz?
No, I'll tell you why it's not. And again, we'll see what happens, obviously, but in terms of testing. This talking to coaches, guys, Hunter, these last couple weeks, what's happening is everywhere coaches go in the building, they're wearing masks. In their office, they must wear a mask unless they're alone. So coaches, obviously, we know what happened with Doug Pederson, but he was outside the building when he got COVID. And because of testing, they made sure that he didn't stay. But no one is really getting COVID when they're in these buildings. And by the way, the 66 players who opted out, a majority of them are opting out because of concerns about bringing something home. But the thing is, folks, the league has tested these players so well; they're actually getting tested, and the guys who are not passing, from what I hear, they're catching it outside. They're not getting it in their buildings. So, I think the league, guys, to answer this question, I think that they're doing a great job. I don't think it's necessary to quarantine Carson Wentz. But what I will tell you, to take this question a little bit further, it really becomes a problem if the starting quarterback gets it, COVID, and the backup does. You got a real problem.
And speaking of that, one of the things Doug mentioned in his Zoom call was about the fact that they're almost treating this like next man up. He used the word. He loves that word, right. Next man up. And it almost reminded me of what I heard other people say with the NBA's perspective, which is that they're looking at it as if someone gets COVID, they're almost treating it like an injury. And it seems like that's almost like the Eagles, the NFL's mentality is, hey, listen, if someone gets COVID, they test positive, they're almost treating it like an injury, and it has to be next man up. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, that's what Bill Polian told us, and he's right, because you just act like he's not going to be there, like it's a season and injury for the guys who opted out. Now, for the guys who are on the COVID list who are not going to be back, let's say you've got a decent case of it, where it's not just you feel great in 2 weeks and you come back, or you come back in 5 days. By the way, you have to be gone for at least 5 days. That's the rule. But if you're a guy that's out for 6 weeks, they're going to act like it's an injury. But this is the unknown about this thing. Because the league cannot tell you, they're not allowed to say whether you failed or yet you're on the list because someone around you had it. But that's the issue. Now, I know on Jordan Mailata, I'm told he's fine, that he should be back, like if it's not today, tomorrow, or the next day. But the problem is we don't know if someone has a serious case of it, and that, nothing has been reported on this stuff because nobody's allowed to talk about it. So that's the thing you worry about if someone has this in terms of being a long-term issue.
I remember you were reporting a few days ago about the situation with Matthew Stafford in Detroit, and it reminded me of the other thing that's going on around other sports about the concerns about false positives. So what is the perspective around the league on the situation with the testing, the positive versus the negative versus the false positive versus the inconclusive? Because there's a lot of layers to this.
Yeah, in fact, we've had 2, Josh, when you bring it up. It's Gardner Minshew of the Jaguars, who was on one day, and 2 days later he was not. And that's not – the rule is you have to miss at least 5 days. So that was a false positive, and Matthew Stafford's was. Not a lot of talk about it, surprisingly, though Stafford obviously is a primetime quarterback. But that to me is a problem. If we see a rash of these false positives, this is going to be a major issue for agents in particular. So we'll keep an eye on that, but there's not been a lot of talk of it. It's been surprising for whatever reason. I don't know why, but that to me is a real issue, and I'm glad you brought that up because I really do wonder of all the players that have tested positive or how many of them are actually correct. That does worry me, but I'll tell you what, we have seen a lot of players return from the COVID list very, very quickly. We've probably had about 15 or 16 of them return after the 5 days, which is interesting.
How important is it that the NFL and the NFLPA came to an agreement not allowing guys to opt in and opt out whenever they want, like they're doing right now with baseball?
Yeah, in fact, you had two things. The deadline opt-out was yesterday at 4 p.m. Eastern, or Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern. And once you get past that deadline, you can't opt out. And the only thing you can do, you could retire if you want. I mean, you could do that. That's your own individual decision. But no, that's it. And now we got that behind us. Now it's really all about football. And folks, the next big day for the NFL is this coming Wednesday, the August 12th. That is when the teams could be on the field for 3.5 hours. But that's not practice time. That's conditioning. And about 120 minutes per day could be a practice, but it's got to be very, very light. And it's not going to be very heavy. It's going to be they're actually going to have a different uniform. It's actually going to be what it looks like if you see video of OTAs when they're in shorts and a helmet and a jersey. That's what's coming next. And then on the 17th, folks, that is when you could be in pads, and that is when we're going to have hitting. Trust me when I say this, Doug Pederson, the Eagles head coach, wants hitting, and that's going to happen.
Adam Caplan, Inside the Birds. The podcast drops every Monday and Thursday. Also, ITV TV, where the Bill Polian interview is as well. Adam Caplan joins us every week along with Jeff Mosh for Football at 4. Follow Adam on Twitter at Caplan NFL. Adam, you want to give a little tease for what Monday's podcast is about?
Yeah, we're probably going to drop the Polian show. That's actually the Polian show right now. You can get on YouTube. It's only on YouTube, and then we're probably going to drop the Polian show on our pod version on Monday, or we're going to do a notebook series. We're going to see what kind of information we can get from our Eagle sources, because again, guys, as I just outlined, very little is going on. There's not a lot to glean from it, but we're getting little small tidbits. So we'll see what we do. And by the way, don't forget our Facebook board. We've got 1,200 members up there of our about 10,000 listeners per show, and we like to get people on there. Just search Inside the Birds on Facebook to join up.
Adam, on a Friday, appreciate you making the time for us on a Friday.
Guys, thank you.